My name is Marietta Vale, and I am 71 years old for 40 years. I have run rehabilitation clinics where people learn to stand again after accidents, strokes, and broken bones. I've built my life around balance muscle, discipline, control. That morning on the red line, all three deserted me. The train's scream hit first metal shrieking against metal, a roar that swallowed breath and thought. I was lying flat between the rails, cheek pressed into gravel so close I could smell oil and iron. The world was vibration, the rattle of bolts, the thud of wheels pounding inches above my spine. My arms locked tight against my sides. Every instinct said move, but experience said stillness was survival. 8 cars. I counted them by the rhythm, not the number. When the noise finally fractured into silence, I lifted my head. Dust drifted through the dim light, heavy as smoke. My ears rang so sharply that the silence felt louder than the train itself. I tested my limbs' pain at the knees, blood sticky against my stockings, but I was whole, alive. I pushed myself upright and reached for the emergency ladder. A transit worker leaned over the edge, shouting something I couldn't hear. I climbed without his help, pulling one rung at a time until my hands met the yellow edge of the platform. When I stood, the crowd shifted back. A few people clapped. Someone sobbed. Others whispered, "How did she survive?" But all I saw were 2 faces. 20 feet away, Grant, my son, pale and still, and Alina, my daughter-in-law, hand pressed theatrically to her mouth. Their expressions should have been shock, relief, horror. Instead, I saw calculation flicker before they remembered the roles they were meant to play. An officer rushed forward. "Ma'am, what happened? Did you fall?" I kept my voice low, steady. "No," I said. "I was pushed." Grant stepped closer, shaking his head, words spilling fast. "Mom, you slipped. I tried to grab you." I turned away, the smell of hot brakes thick in my throat. The steel beneath my shoes still trembled from the passing weight. If family wants you gone, you stop being family. I walked toward the station stairs, each step deliberate, leaving their voices and the dark mouth of the tunnel behind. The hospital lights were too bright, the air too clean, the kind of sterile quiet that makes every heartbeat sound mechanical. A nurse said I was lucky. Mild concussion, bruised ribs, nothing broken. I nodded, though lucky felt like the wrong word. When the doctor left, Grant appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, face arranged into concern. Alina trailed behind him, carrying flowers that still dripped water from the stems. "You scared us," she said softly, arranging them into a plastic vase. Grant added, "Mom, you lost your footing. You've been tired lately." I studied him, remembering the warmth of his hand when he was small, how he'd steadied himself against my arm to learn to walk. Now he couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't fall. I said, he sighed, rehearsed and patient. "You're confused. The police said the platform cameras were down for maintenance. There's nothing to investigate." That word maintenance stuck like a pin in my mind. A coincidence, they would say. The universe doesn't schedule coincidences with such precision. A detective stopped by mid-afternoon, hat in hand, polite enough to seem harmless. He repeated the same phrase. "No footage. Mrs. Vale. You're fortunate others were there to help." I told him what I remembered: the push, the sound, the 2 figures. But his eyes flicked briefly toward Grant and Alina, then back to his notepad. I could already see the report forming. Elderly woman suffers fall. No evidence of foul play. When they finally left me alone, the silence pressed hard against my ears. I heard the subway again, in memory, that rush of air, that steel scream, and my body went rigid. The nurse thought I was cold and adjusted the blanket. She couldn't see that it wasn't fear, but clarity spreading through me. Slow and certain. 3 days earlier, in my office hallway. I'd heard them whisper behind a half-closed door accelerate the transition. Equity split finalized before quarter's end. I'd walked past without a sound, pretending not to notice. Now, lying under hospital light, I knew exactly what that meant. The house felt colder after the hospital. I'd lived there for 40 years, and yet every room seemed to echo. The scent of antiseptic from my bandages mixed with the faint trace of Alina's perfume on the hallway curtains, reminders that I was no longer safe in my own home. By late evening, I sat in my study with a cup of mint tea and my laptop open to the clinic's financial portal. Spreadsheets had always soothed me. Numbers behaved when people didn't. Line after line scrolled by until something snagged my attention. Axiom Medlog. Small, neat monthly charges, $3,600 here, $4,200 there. Consistent enough to look legitimate. Small enough to hide in plain sight. I dug deeper, pulling up our vendor directory. Axiom Medlog wasn't listed under any approved contracts. I searched through archived folders, invoices, supplier renewals. Nothing. Every other expense had a digital paper trail. This one vanished into silence. The next morning, I met Atticus Rhodes, my old attorney, at a quiet cafe near the Charles River. He looked exactly as I remembered, methodical. Kind eyes behind rimless glasses. Voice that never rose above reason. I told him everything: the platform, the fall, the missing footage, the charges. He stirred his coffee slowly. Marietta, an attempted murder case without evidence won't survive an hour in court. But fraud leaves footprints. If they wanted your company, they'd start with the books. His calmness steadied me. Then I'll find them, I said. He slid a small card across the table. Lydia Tran, forensic accountant. Quiet, precise, and no one's fool. Tell her I sent you. That evening, I returned home. Lights dim. City hum beyond the windows. I opened my laptop again, scrolling through the ledger with new purpose. Every number pulsed now with its own heartbeat, whispering of hands that had taken what wasn't theirs. Outside, the red line rumbled beneath the city, the same pulse of steel and speed that had nearly ended me. Inside, I began the work of uncovering what it had all been for. Sleep came in fragments, thin as paper. When I did drift off, the sound of the train returned, that violent thunder beneath my ribs. The flash of light cutting through dark. I woke tangled in sheets, breath ragged, hand pressed against the scar on my knee that had barely begun to heal. The clock glowed 3:07 a.m. Boston outside was silent, but in my mind, the rails still hummed. I made tea and sat by the window. The city lights reflected in the glass. The steam curled upward, carrying me backward through years to the clinic's first day in 1989, when the walls smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Thomas, my husband then, had spent the morning assembling therapy chairs while Grant, age 8, brought me coffee in a chipped mug and announced he'd work for me someday. I'd believed him back then. His hands were small, his smile without calculation. Memory is cruel that way. It never warns you when it's about to turn. By sunrise, the house still felt like someone else's. I needed air. I walked to the nearest clinic in Cambridge, unannounced. The receptionist startled, then smiled wide. Mrs. Vale, it's been ages. In the therapy room, a patient I remembered from years before was practicing his steps with a walker. He looked up, beaming. "You're still here," he said. That small sentence steadied me more than medicine could. I stayed for an hour, adjusting straps, offering encouragement, feeling the rhythm of work return to my bones. The smell of antiseptic and effort was familiar, grounding. When I left, I understood something simple and terrifying to fight this war. I couldn't look like I was fighting. They expected anger, retaliation, proof. What they wouldn't expect was silence. So that evening, when Grant called to check in, I softened my voice, let weariness sound like surrender. I told him I was done reliving the accident, that I needed peace. Peace, for now, was camouflage. By the following week, my voice had learned to sound gentle again. I invited them to dinner, the first since the accident. I made pot roast the way Grant liked as a boy, with rosemary and red wine, and set the table with my mother's china. When they arrived, Alina wore a silk blouse far too new for coincidence. Her perfume filled the house before her voice did. I waited until the plates were served before saying it. "I've spoken to the detective," I began. I told him I'm dropping everything. The fall was my fault. Exhaustion. Stress. Nothing more. The relief that crossed Alina's face was almost radiant. Her shoulders sank. Lips parted in a small exhale of triumph before she remembered to look sympathetic. Grant's reaction was quieter. He didn't smile, didn't lift his fork, just kept watching me the way a man studies a ticking clock. "That's good news," he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. "I need peace," I replied. "And family." We ate in that uneasy quiet, the kind where silverware sounds too loud. Alina filled the silence with talk of home renovations, vacations, the usual small lies that decorate guilt. I smiled, nodded, even poured them wine. By dessert, she was laughing again. The sound scraped against my ribs like glass. After they left, I collected the dishes slowly, letting the room return to stillness. The scent of roasted herbs lingered, mingled with something colder, the faint metallic tang of deceit. Upstairs, in the study, I opened my journal. Keep smiling until the numbers finish talking. My phone buzzed a message from Lydia Tran. Preliminary findings. Axiom Medlog, traced to Gibraltar-based holding account. IP addresses linked to your company server. More soon. I closed the journal and looked out the window, across the street. Their car idled at the curb for a long moment before pulling away. From my vantage point, I could almost see the reflection of my own face in the glass. Calm, forgiving, and utterly unreadable. Exactly how it needed to be. 2 weeks later, the boardroom at Vale Rehabilitation Group smelled of old coffee and fresh tension. I sat at the head of the table, papers neatly stacked before me, a pen aligned precisely with the page margin. On the surface, it was a normal operations meeting. In reality, it was the beginning of a quiet war. Across from me, Grant scrolled through his phone, feigning boredom. Alina reviewed the agenda with exaggerated focus, her red nails tapping the paper like warning signals. I began calmly. Effective immediately, the profitable clinics in Beacon Hill, Cambridge, and Somerville will be reorganized under a new entity, Vale Therapeutic Holdings. Alina's head jerked up. "You're moving assets, I'm protecting them," I said. "New structure, new insurance contracts. The old organization will continue under your management. Grant. It still holds full liability coverage and existing leases." He froze. "You're cutting us out." "I'm following sound business practice." The audit results were clear inefficiencies. Misplaced funds. This separation ensures continuity. He shoved back his chair, the legs screeching across the floor. "You can't do this." I met his eyes steadily. "Watch me." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause. I handed a folder to the man seated beside me. Dr. Leon Cantrell. My new chief operating officer, a soft-spoken neurologist I'd trusted for years. His signature already inked the transfer documents. "Transition begins Monday," I said. "Leon will oversee compliance." Grant's jaw worked soundlessly before he stormed out. Alina scrambling after him, her heels striking the floor like a metronome of panic. When the door closed, I exhaled for the first time in hours. Leon poured me a glass of water. "You all right, Marietta?" "I will be," I said. My hands trembled as I took the glass. Not from fear, but from the weight of finally moving first. Outside, the city lights glittered against the Charles River, bright, fractured, and endless. For the first time since the subway, I felt something close to control. The summons arrived on a Thursday morning, printed on heavy ivory paper as if good stationery could make it less vicious. Alina Chambers versus Marietta Vale. Petition for injunction and emergency review citing elder abuse, mental instability, diminished capacity. The words looked almost elegant, lined up like soldiers marching toward insult. By noon, my attorney confirmed what I already suspected. They wanted control back. They wanted me discredited before the new company could take root. The court ordered a psychological evaluation within 10 days. I agreed without hesitation. If they wanted to turn my mind into a courtroom, they'd find it spotless. The testing center was a sterile suite overlooking the harbor. A woman named Dr. Helene Ward introduced herself. Professional smile. Clipboard in hand. "This isn't an interrogation, Mrs. Vale, just a series of assessments." She began with pattern recognition, word recall, emotional reasoning. I solved each quietly, methodically, answering questions in full sentences. The hardest part wasn't logic, it was pretending calm when anger wanted out. When she asked me to describe the subway incident, I did, without trembling. I lay still until the train stopped. Then I stood up and walked away. My voice surprised even me level, factual, as if describing another woman's survival. Dr. Ward lowered her pen. "And what did that moment teach you? That instincts are underrated," I said. "And mercy is optional." A week later, her report reached my lawyer's desk. Superior cognitive function, excellent memory retention, no evidence of impairment. A single paragraph that silenced every accusation. Still, the process took its toll. That night, after reading the report twice, I felt the first ache in my chest, dull, rhythmic, warning. Lydia arrived with takeout and concern in her eyes. "You need to rest," she said. "I will." I lied. There were still filings to prepare, contracts to finalize, and a lifetime's worth of betrayal to balance on paper. Rest could wait until the numbers were even. Rain glazed the city that morning, soft and steady. A sound like static against glass. I sat in my office, watching the droplets gather into silver streaks. When Lydia arrived carrying a thick binder bound in blue, she set it down with the weight of revelation. 300 pages. She said quietly, every transfer traced. $312,000 funneled through Gibraltar, ending in an account under Alina's maiden name, Petrova. The numbers were printed in neat columns, each one a blade, page after page. Proof stacked higher than guilt could climb over. I stared at Alina's signature, not a forgery, not a mistake deliberate, practiced. Mine for years before it turned against me. By mid-morning, Atticus had already filed the forensic report with the court and the Department of Financial Oversight. "We're moving fast," he said over the phone. "The regulators will want to make a statement." They did. At noon, while I reviewed affidavits, the television in the corner flickered to life. Alina stood on the courthouse steps, voice trembling with feigned hurt. "My mother-in-law is unwell," she said into the microphones. "She's been confused for months, accusing her own family of crimes that don't exist." Cameras flashed. I almost admired her performance, the soft quiver of her hand on her chest, the perfectly timed tear. But timing can be cruel. At that very hour, federal agents walked into the company's downtown offices. Lydia texted a single line, "They're there," from my window overlooking Tremont Street. I saw the black SUVs arrive, no drama, just procedure. Sirens echoed briefly, then stilled. Agents in dark jackets entered through the revolving doors. 20 minutes later, Grant was escorted out in cuffs, his face pale and blank. Alina's name still on his lips as if it might save him. I watched until the last car pulled away. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and reflective. For the first time in months, the reflection looking back at me through the glass wasn't fear, it was finality. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The kind of chill that came not from air, but from truth about to be spoken aloud. Rows of reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, their pens already poised, the hum of whispered speculation filling the space. I sat quietly beside Atticus, my hands folded over the edge of the polished table. When the bailiff called the session to order, Alina entered first. Her once perfect posture sagged under the weight of weeks without cameras or control. She avoided my eyes, clutching her lawyer's sleeve like a lifeline. The clerk read the charges: wire fraud, conspiracy, falsified business records. The judge asked for her plea. Her voice was barely a whisper. Guilty, Your Honor. The words fell like a curtain. Somewhere behind me, a camera clicked. Grant followed, jaw tight, eyes defiant. The prosecution offered him a DIL cooperation in exchange for leniency. He refused. His sentence came swift: 7 years for conspiracy and obstruction. When the gavel struck, he flinched but never looked at me. Maybe shame was still too far beyond him. Then the judge called my name. I rose, walked to the podium, and unfolded the paper I'd written weeks ago, but no longer needed to read. I'm here because I lived. I said simply, I survived what was meant to end me on the tracks, and in the aftermath, I built something with love. They tried to turn it into currency. But this, I gestured faintly toward the courtroom, isn't victory. It's proof that survival has its own language. The judge nodded slowly. Your composure, Mrs. Vale, honors this court. Outside, reporters surged forward. Microphones extended. Mrs. Vale, do you feel vindicated? Do you forgive them? I stopped at the steps, the air crisp against my face. I run clinics for recovery, I said, not revenge. Then I walked past the noise, toward the quiet that finally felt like mine. Spring arrived late in Boston that year, the kind that softened the city's edges with rain and lilac scent. On a quiet morning, I found myself standing at the entrance to the Park Street station, the same place I'd sworn never to return. The tiled walls gleamed new from cleaning, but I could still feel the pulse of memory beneath them: metal, motion, fear. For a long moment, I just listened. The faint hum of the rails below vibrated through the soles of my shoes, steady and alive. I took one breath, then another, and descended the steps. The platform looked ordinary commuters with coffee cups, scrolling phones. No one noticing the ghosts that rode with me. When the train arrived, my hands trembled, but I stepped forward anyway. Inside, the air smelled of electricity and paper. I found a seat by the window. A few stops later, Lydia joined me, her briefcase tucked under one arm, her smile quiet but knowing. I reached into my coat pocket and held out a small bronze subway token, polished smooth by years of being carried. Keep it, I said. Proof that peace costs courage. She closed her fingers around it gently. And that you paid in full, outside. The city blurred past sunlight on brick, the glint of the Charles River, the faint shimmer of new leaves. Grant was serving his time in a federal facility upstate. His letters arrived once a month, mostly silence between the lines. Alina's probation required her to teach community therapy workshops. Irony the court didn't intend, but I quietly approved. At Vale Therapeutic Holdings, I'd launched a foundation for trauma survivors, funding small clinics that offered what I once needed most: a place to rebuild without shame. As the train slowed near Kendall Square, I caught my reflection in the glass. The same eyes, a steadier pulse. The rails hummed beneath us. Not a threat anymore, but a reminder. Life moved forward, and this time, I chose to move with it.